The film to me is essentially a portrait of the new generation. I grew up in the 90s at a time when I think materialism and commercialism really defined existence, and it was a bubble, and I think that bubble had to burst. The cream generation to me is a playful way of describing my own contemporaries. I think that the new generation today is quite unlike any generation preceding it. M-Cream is a feature film that explores the contemporary youth rebellion and the myriad realities of rebellion overall. I think for me, I was inspired by the stories of my own contemporaries and peers, and I think the film to me is really an intimate portrait of the new generation in India, and I think across many parts of the world.
If you look at it, rebellion in the 60s or 70s, it had very overtly political messages. It was usually rebellion against an established political order. Rebellion was very traditionally politically understood. Whereas I think for my generation, rebellion and conformity have a lot more to do with personal identity. It has a lot more to do with trying to understand who we are as young people, where do we want our, what we want our place in the world to be, how we want the world to change. And I mean, if you look at the movements of today, if you look at the LGBT movements, if you look at the gender rights movements, the environmental movements, they're all movements that are trying to make the world a better place tomorrow, but trying to understand who we are as human beings today.
Well, the cream generation itself, I think, is a very interesting concept. It's not just the generation who's exposed to drugs. It's also a generation who I think this is my interpretation of it, and Agneya may laugh at me later, but I think it's also the generation that wants to escape, that wants to sort of maybe sugarcoat things, maybe escape things, or on the other hand of the spectrum, confront those things.
Clearly, the youth in India is still largely suppressed, I think, is true to say. Suppressed by tradition, by society's norms, by family. The institution of family is still very strong and has a strong hold on young people and what they presume to be or do in life. In many instances, it's beginning to change.
It really is encouraging that so many young people are choosing to rebel, because when faced with injustice, or when faced with a reality that doesn't make sense to them, I think it makes more sense for us to speak out rather than blindly submit. We've been fortunate to travel with the film now to a number of film festivals across the world. And I think one of the most interesting and illuminating responses that we've received is that young people, whether we're in Germany or the United States or Africa, they've all really come back with the response that they've related to the characters and to the story.
No matter what adversity there is in our country, and there is a lot of it, given the diversity, given the size, given the sort of the extent of what we are living with constantly, whether it's corruption, which is it's a given in our society, or terror and rape and violence and these things that you see every day in the papers. How do you sort of relate to those on a very humane level? And this film is really much about those four characters and those four young people and how they react to the world around them. So the generation that we are talking about is representative in our film and is represented by these four people whose outlooks and viewpoints are all very different from each other.
Especially in the urban centers, some young people who've been educated or who have happened to have traveled abroad and seen more of the world, that itself is an education, more aware. And then the influence of the media, especially the social media that young people are into now. Clearly there's a there's a part of the youth which claims its independence and its right to be different and to do what it wants to do, just as we did back in the 60s, you know, in the West. But I think in India it's still, the majority is still, doesn't have that independence yet.
A lot of people say that my generation is apathetic, but I don't entirely believe that to be true. I think you could go up to any young person in India or anywhere in the world and ask them what they think about, you know, gay rights or about women's empowerment or about even climate change, for instance. And these are all issues that you will find some of the most profound answers from some very, very regular young people.
The main point that the film is trying to get across is the fact that we need to question you know, our circumstances, question our role in society, and question society itself. I think we as a generation are quite you know, confused as to what we can do on an individual or collective level in terms of creating any kind of social change. But I think the first step is to question. We do all have the same struggles at the end of the day, and I think that perhaps this is the beginning of a larger movement, and I do hope it is.